The Praetorian Guard, Chapter 16, Training and Ceremony. The next morning, the air around the training ground buzzed with a low, humming tension. The underground facility, hidden from the outside world, was a place where only the best came to sharpen their skills. In this particular corner of the shadows of the night headquarters, the usual quiet had been replaced by the rhythmic sound of fists meeting flesh, feet shuffling on the mat, and the rapid, controlled breaths of two combatants locked in an intense dance of hand-to-hand combat. John stood across from Sarah, the leader of their team, his muscles coiled and ready for whatever came next. They had been sparring for nearly an hour now, pushing each other to their limits, their movements so precise and fast that any casual observer would have seen only blurs of motion. The implants they both carried, gifts from the shadows, had enhanced their reflexes, speed, and strength far beyond normal human capabilities. But even with those enhancements, John knew better than to underestimate Sarah. Sweat dripped down his brow, but his focus never wavered. Sarah was circling him like a predator, her movements smooth and graceful, her dark eyes watching his every move. She wasn't just a leader. She was a warrior, honed through years of experience in the field. Her speed was deadly, her strikes precise, and John had learned the hard way that she could be as ruthless in training as she was in a real fight. John shifted his stance, his eyes never leaving her as he waited for the next attack. And then, without warning, Sarah struck. She moved with a speed that defied human reflexes, her body a blur as she closed the distance between them in the blink of an eye. Her right fist shot toward John's face, aimed to stun and disorient, but John was ready. He sidestepped, his own hand coming up to deflect her punch with a quick slap of his palm, using the momentum to shift his weight and deliver a swift kick to her side. Sarah twisted, her body bending like a whip, narrowly avoiding the blow. In the same motion, she spun low, sweeping her leg toward John's ankles in an attempt to knock him off his feet. John jumped, barely clearing the sweep, and in midair he twisted, sending his own foot flying towards Sarah's head in a high, arching kick. She blocked it with both arms crossed above her head, the impact sending a dull thud through the training ground. The two combatants separated, circling each other again, their breaths coming faster now, but their focus as sharp as ever. The room around them was eerily silent, save for the sounds of their movements, the soft part of feet on the mat, the occasional grunt of exertion, the rapid heartbeats that pulsed in their ears. Sarah's lips curled into a smile, her eyes gleaming with approval. "You're faster, John," she said, her voice steady despite the intensity of their sparring. "But not fast enough." John smirked, his eyes narrowing. "You'll have to do better than that, Sarah." She took the challenge without hesitation. With a speed that left even John struggling to keep up, Sarah launched herself at him again, this time a flurry of punches aimed at his torso, head, and sides. Quick, precise jabs meant to overwhelm his defenses. John reacted instinctively, his body moving almost before his mind had registered the attack. He deflected each blow with calculated precision, his arms blocking, parrying, and redirecting her strikes, their limbs blurring in a rapid exchange of attacks and counters. The speed of their movements had long surpassed what the average eye could follow. This was a fight between enhanced warriors, and every second of hesitation could mean the difference between victory and defeat. Sarah's fist came in low, aimed at John's gout, and he twisted his body just in time, grabbing her wrist in a firm grip. For a split second, he had the advantage, until Sarah used his momentum against him, pivoting on her heel and pulling him forward with a strength that caught him off guard. John stumbled forward, but before he could regain his footing, Sarah's knee shot up and slammed into his chest. The force of the blow knocked the wind out of him, and he barely managed to stay upright, gritting his teeth as pain flared through his ribs. But Sarah wasn't done. In the same fluid motion, she spun again, this time aiming a vicious roundhouse kick at John's head. With barely a moment to react, John ducked, feeling the air whip past him as Sarah's foot sailed inches above his head. He rolled to the side, coming up on one knee and immediately launching himself forward, his shoulder crashing into Sarah's midsection and knocking her off balance. They tumbled together, both of them hitting the mat hard, but John was quicker to recover. He pinned Sarah down, his knee pressing into her chest as his hands locked her wrists to the ground. For a split second, he thought he had her. But Sarah was never one to be caught easily. With a sudden, powerful twist of her body, Sarah dislodged John, her legs hooking around his in a perfect grappling move that sent him crashing to the mat beside her. Before he could react, she had reversed the pin, her knee pressed into his chest, her forearm across his throat, applying just enough pressure to make it clear she could win at any moment. John blinked up at her, chest heaving, his muscles burning from the exertion. Despite the intensity of the fight, he couldn't help but grin. "That was sneaky," he muttered, his breath coming in gasps. Sarah smiled down at him, her dark hair falling slightly over her face. "It's not about strength, John. It's about using your opponent's momentum against them." With a satisfied look, she released him, standing and offering him a hand to pull him back to his feet. John took it, rising with a wince, but feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline that came after a fight. "You're improving," Sarah said, brushing the dust from her uniform. "But don't get cocky. You've got a lot more to learn." John smirked, though his ribs ached from the knee she'd delivered earlier. "I'll remember that." They stood for a moment, catching their breath, before Sarah clapped him on the shoulder. "Get cleaned up. Tomorrow we start working with the rest of the team. Hand-to-hand is just the beginning." John nodded, already looking forward to the next challenge. The pain was temporary, but the skills he was honing here, the precision, the speed, the instincts, they were what would keep him alive in the field. As he turned to leave the training ground, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Every sparring match with Sarah was a lesson, and every bruise was a step closer to becoming the warrior he knew he had to be. The cool air of the underground facility wrapped around John as he walked through the empty corridor, his footsteps echoing softly against the cold steel wall. He was on his way to the changing rooms, his muscles still tingling from the intense sparring session with Sarah. The sharp pain in his ribs from the knee she'd landed earlier was a dull reminder of just how deadly she could be. But despite the aches, John couldn't help but smile to himself as he entered the locker room. As he peeled off his sweat-soaked training clothes and stepped into the shower, the hot water cascading over his tired muscles, Joan's mind wandered to something far more pleasant than the combat drills he had just endured. Tonight, after everything that had happened over the past few weeks, the mission with the minister, the near-death encounters, and the weight of the secrets he carried, John had something to look forward to. Tonight, he and Kara would spend the evening together, away from duty, away from the shadows. For the first time in what felt like forever, he would have a night that was normal. He could already picture her smile, the way her eyes lit up when she teased him, the quiet moments when they weren't soldiers but simply two people. Tonight would be theirs, and for a few hours, the weight of the Empire, the rebellion, and the shadows would disappear. John finished drying off and began to dress, still grinning to himself. Kara had stood by him through everything, even when he had been forced to keep secrets from her. There was something between them now, something deeper than the bond forged at the academy. Tonight was a chance to explore that. But thoughts of the next day quickly sobered him. Tomorrow was his promotion ceremony. Private and discreet, as everything involving the shadows of the night was. It wasn't the kind of ceremony most soldiers dreamed of. No grand fanfare, no public accolades. The shadows did their work in the dark, and so did their celebrations. The promotion ceremony would be held deep within the hidden headquarters, attended by only a few select people. General Tomas Hulk, commander of the Shadows, would oversee the ceremony. John had only spoken with Hulk a handful of times, but his reputation was legendary. Cold, calculating, and utterly loyal to the Dominion. Hulk would keep the ceremony brief, just the way John preferred it. Sarah and his team would be there too. They had been with him through the toughest moments, and he couldn't imagine standing in front of the general without them by his side. John zipped up his jacket and glanced at himself in the mirror. He looked the same, but something about him felt different. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. Tomorrow, he will be a one-star lieutenant in the most secretive unit in the Empire. He grabbed his jacket and left the locker room, his thoughts shifting to the evening ahead. The responsibilities of tomorrow were already pressing in on him, but tonight belonged to Kara. Later that evening, John stood in front of Kara's apartment, feeling a mix of anticipation and nervous energy. It wasn't the first time they'd spent time together outside of missions, but there was something different about tonight. Something unspoken had passed between them when they kissed at the shuttle after returning to the capital. And now, standing at her door, John felt the connection stronger than ever. The door slid open, and there she was, Kara, smiling softly at him, her eyes sparkling in the dim light of the apartment. She looked effortlessly beautiful, dressed in something simple but elegant, her hair falling loosely around her shoulders. For a moment, John forgot about everything else. The Empire, the shadows, even the promotion ceremony. All he could see was her. "Hey, you," Kara said, stepping aside to let him in. "I wasn't sure if you'd make it on time. Figured you'd be stuck with Sarah, breaking a few bones in training." John grinned as he stepped inside, the door sliding shut behind him. "I barely survived, but I'm here." Kara chuckled, leading him into the living room. The lights were low and a quiet, calming atmosphere filled the space. A small table was set with a modest dinner and a bottle of wine. It was simple but perfect, just the escape they both needed. They ate together, talking about everything and nothing. For once, there were no missions to discuss, no military jargon, no hidden agendas. It was just them, laughing about old academy stories, reminiscing about the days when life had been less complicated. After dinner, they moved to the couch, sitting close, the quiet hum of the city outside providing a distant backdrop. Kara leaned into John, her head resting on his shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her closer. There was no need for words at that moment. The quiet intimacy between them was enough. "I've missed this," Kara said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Being with you without all the chaos." John nodded, resting his chin on top of her head. "Me too. This feels right." Kara turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting his. For a moment, they just looked at each other, and then, without hesitation, they kissed again. This time, it wasn't rushed or filled with urgency. It was slow, tender, filled with the emotions they had both been holding back for too long. As the night went on, the world outside seemed to fade away. They stayed on the couch, wrapped up in each other, letting the weight of their responsibilities slip away. For the first time in a long time, John felt at peace. The next morning, the peace from the previous night was gone, replaced by the quiet intensity of the shadows. John stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar of his formal uniform, the weight of the upcoming ceremony pressing on his mind. His chest bore the insignia of his current rank, but soon that would change. He hadn't seen Kara that morning. After their night together, they had shared a quiet goodbye, both knowing that their duties were calling them back. But John still felt the warmth of her presence, a calming undercurrent beneath the storm of thoughts that swirled in his mind. John made his way through the labyrinth of halls in the Shadow's headquarters, his boots echoing against the steel floor. The secrecy of the organization meant the ceremony would be small. Only those within the unit could know about it. As he approached the secluded hall where the ceremony would take place, he took a deep breath, steadying himself. The door slid open, revealing a dimly lit room with a single raised platform at the center. General Tomas Hoke stood there, tall and imposing, his hands clasped behind his back. His icy blue eyes locked onto John the moment he entered. Sarah and the rest of the team, Mark, Sun, Sella, and Marta, stood in a semicircle around the platform, waiting. John stepped forward, his heart pounding, but his face calm. General Hulk's voice was cold but steady. "John Steele, step forward." John did as he was told, standing in front of the general, his back straight, his eyes forward. "You have served this unit with distinction," Hoke said, his voice echoing through the hall. "Your actions have protected the Dominion, safeguarded its secrets, and ensured the survival of our way of life. For your unwavering dedication, you are hereby promoted to the rank of 1 St. Lieutenant in the shadows of the night." Hoke reached out, handing John a new insignia, the silver gleaming under the dim lights. John accepted it, pinning it to his chest. "Congratulations, Lieutenant Steele," Hoke said, a rare flicker of approval crossing his face. John saluted, and Hoke returned it. The rest of the team stepped forward, offering their congratulations with quiet nods and smiles. Sarah clapped him on the shoulder, her eyes filled with pride. "You've earned this," she said simply. John nodded, feeling the weight of the new rank settle over him. The responsibility, the expectations, it all felt heavier now. But as he stood there, surrounded by his team, he knew he wasn't alone. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he thought of Kara. He had her too.